They had no name for themselves, not because they lacked language, but because they didn't need one. In their eyes, only the prey required names. The hunted, the weak, those who screamed when the dark came too close. But they were the hunters, the perfected end of a long, ruthless line. And in their silence, the galaxy learned to fear them. They had been moving across the stars for thousands of years, system by system, planet by planet, always the same pattern: observe, measure, strike, consume. They didn't conquer in the way others did. They didn't negotiate, enslave, or colonize. They simply took what they wanted, dismantled what they didn't understand, and moved on. No mercy, no warning, no hesitation. If you were alive when they arrived, you didn't stay that way for long. They were not monsters. That would have implied chaos. These were no mindless beasts. They were scientists, tacticians, soldiers, all in one. A civilization forged around the idea that survival wasn't enough. To survive was weak. To dominate, that was the goal. Their bodies had adapted to every kind of world. They could see beyond light, hear beyond sound. Their skin could resist acid, fire, even radiation. They didn't fear vacuum. They didn't flinch at pain, and they never stopped evolving. They learned quickly, adapted faster than most species could comprehend. And when they devoured a world, they didn't just feed on the flesh. They fed on data, biology, structure, thought. They consumed knowledge, rewrote it, filed it away, and moved on. Many had tried to stop them. Entire coalitions, starborn armies, united fleets. But war was not their weakness. War was their language. They were predators. And in their minds, the rest of the galaxy had forgotten what that word meant. They hunted everything, from silicon-based hives to methane swimmers drifting through gas giants. They'd taken planets of light and planets drowned in shadow. To them, every new species was a test, not of violence, but of worth. And so far, none had passed. Some call them extinction machines. Others, shadows from before the stars were born. But in truth, they were just a species that had removed weakness from their vocabulary. They didn't hate. They didn't love. They evaluated. If a species showed potential, they studied it. If it showed resistance, they analyzed it. If it fought back, they smiled. Because predators enjoy the chase. And so it went. Across centuries. Across light years. They'd all but run out of worthy prey. The galaxy had grown soft. Too many empires. Too many rules. Too many comfortable species living in the echo of their own importance. And the predators were growing bored. They searched the edges of the known map, scanning for anomalies. Something new. Something alive. Something that could make them feel again. That's when they found it. A strange little signal from a system long thought abandoned. Weak. Unshielded. A whisper bouncing through static. Old. Primitive. But something about it felt wrong. It didn't match any current species. Not even any extinct ones. It was structured. Intentional. And most unsettling of all, it had no response pattern. No reply frequency. Just one repeating pulse. Steady. Measured. Like a heart still beating in the dark. The scouts were dispatched. Standard protocol. Identify the source. Assess the threat. Eliminate or harvest. No one expected resistance. It was just a blue planet, orbiting an aging star, tucked in a quiet corner of the galaxy no one had bothered to name in over 1,000 years. They thought it would be easy, a clean sweep, another record in their data archive, another forgotten world, burned and erased. They didn't know, they couldn't have, that the signal wasn't a message. It was a trap, and the galaxy's greatest predators had just found their match. It was quiet, too quiet. The ship entered orbit without resistance. The planet didn't shoot back. It didn't broadcast warnings or launch defense drones. It simply turned beneath them. Slow, blue, silent. And that unsettled the crew more than any cannon ever could. They'd seen planets crumble before they landed. Watched species scream into space as their homes were stripped bare. They'd broken worlds that fought back. But this one? It did nothing. Just clouds moving over deep oceans. Empty cities clinging to rusted coasts. Forests grown over the bones of what once was. They scanned for life. biological signals, radio heat, anything. There was something, but not life the way they knew it. More like a hum, a vibration beneath the soil. Old tech maybe, broken, buried, or asleep. But they didn't know, and they didn't like that. The ship's leader, a seasoned predator named Kelvier, stood over the readings, cold eyes watching the data stream in. He'd hunted everything from solar serpents to hive queens. He didn't believe in ghosts. But this world didn't feel right. It wasn't just the silence. It was the pattern of it. Too perfect, too clean, as if something had scrubbed the noise away. Still, protocol was protocol. They dispatched a landing party. For their best. Full armor, weapons, scanners. The crew called a sweep. A formality. No one expected a fight. The planet had been dark for centuries, maybe longer. The surface looked abandoned. Civilization had once existed here. Roads, buildings, towers half-eaten by vines. But was all hollow now. No lights, no movement, just wind. And that signal, still pulsing, still steady, still waiting. The landing team touched down near a ruined city once called Denver. They didn't know the name, only the coordinates. Tall buildings leaned like tired trees. Glass shattered underfoot. Everything was overgrown, but not rotted. Not destroyed. Preserved. As if the world had chosen to stop. Or had been stopped. One of the hunters, Vorik, picked up a child's toy beneath the rubble. A simple ball. It hadn't decayed. Not a scratch. Not a blemish. It looked placed. Intentionally. Waiting for someone to notice. He dropped it and kept walking. The signal came from the center of the ruins. An underground chamber. Metal doors, sealed tight, but old. Covered in strange markings. Not military. Not industrial. Personal. Words etched in old Earth languages they didn't recognize. But the signal was inside. That much they knew. They opened the doors. And the signal stopped. Not jammed. Not blocked. Just ended. As if it had served its purpose. The hunters descended. Uneasy now. Sensors flickered. Communications cut in and out. But they kept going. Because predators don't retreat. Not without blood. The chamber wasn't empty. There were walls lined with old tech. Machines that hadn't powered up in centuries. Screens covered in dust. Symbols they couldn't translate. But one console still glowed. Dimly. Softly. As if it had been watching them arrive. Vorik reached for it. And then the lights cut out. All of them. Across the entire planet. Satellites. Ships. Scanners. Dark. The mother vessel in orbit blinked off the network. Systems scrambled. Gravity shifted. Power surged and vanished. Then came the sound. Not from the chamber. Not from the surface. But from underneath. A deep, slow hum. Like an old engine coughing to life after a long winter. And then something moved. Not a machine. Not a structure. But the planet itself. The soil shifted. Not from tectonics. But like a sleeper turning over in its bed. The team tried to pull back. But Vorik was gone. No blood. No scream. No fight. One moment there. The next not. And the others? They stopped moving too. Not dead. Not unconscious. Just frozen. Staring ahead at something only they could see. Kelvier watched the feed from orbit. Then it cut to black. All four hunters lost. No trace. No signal. Just silence again. And that pulsing. The heartbeat signal. Now faster. Stronger. They had come expecting prey. They had come expecting weakness. But now they understood. This wasn't a broken world. It wasn't abandoned. It was bait. And they had taken it. They had lost teams before. Sometimes in storms. Sometimes in battle. But never like this. Never without a sound. Without a trace. Without a fight. The four who had gone down to the surface simply vanished. No screams. No struggle. Just a blank screen where once there had been movement. Kelvier paced the bridge of the ship, watching the static crawl across every monitor. He'd seen death before. Caused it. Measured it. Logged it. But this felt different. This was quiet. Deliberate. Like the planet had chosen when to respond. He ordered a second team. 10 this time. Fully equipped. They landed in a different zone. Far from the ruins. Flatlands. Safer. Or so they thought. They set up a base. Deployed drones. Scanned everything. And this time they brought fail-safes. If the signal spiked, they would retreat. If anything moved, they would fire. But nothing moved, not for the first few hours. The wind passed softly over the hills. Trees stood still. No animals. No insects. Just emptiness. One of the soldiers reported seeing shadows move across the horizon. But there was no sun, and the shadows didn't match the terrain. The next reported hearing footsteps behind her. But there was no one there. The third simply dropped his weapon, stared into the sky, and whispered a single word. "They're still here." When asked who, he couldn't answer, because he wasn't talking anymore. He just stood there, breathing, eyes wide, and when they tried to touch him, he crumbled. Not died, not exploded. He fell apart, turned to ash in the shape of a man. Kelvier ordered full evacuation, but the ship's systems lagged. Shuttles refused to launch. Navigation returned nonsense coordinates. The stars above twisted in the wrong directions. Not physically, but like the sky was lying. The crew grew silent. Fear crept in, and with it came doubt. One technician tried to reboot the ship's core systems manually. He made it to the control chamber, and then never came back. When a security team was sent after him, they found the door sealed from the inside, and when they forced it open, the room was empty. No man, no tools, just a handprint on the wall. Human. That's when the crew stopped sleeping. No one could rest, not because of noise, but because of dreams, images, sounds, memories. But they weren't their memories. They saw cities they didn't recognize, languages they never learned. They saw Earth, though they didn't know it by that name. They saw fire and war and something ending, again and again. And then they woke up, screaming, always screaming. It wasn't just psychological. The planet was affecting their thoughts, their behavior. Machines began breaking without reason. Wires melted, circuits fused, drones dropped from the sky mid-flight. And the signal? It had returned. Slower now, softer, like it was listening. The predators were no longer hunters. They were prey, and something was circling them. The 10th day was the worst. That's when the air changed. It thickened, grew heavy, not in composition. Scans said oxygen levels were fine, but breathing fell harder, like guilt pressing on the chest, like the world itself disapproved. Kelvier stood alone on the observation deck that night. And for the first time in his long life, he felt watched, not by a beast, not by a machine, but by something patient, something old, and something angry. The crew began to fracture. Some wanted to flee, others wanted to fight. But how do you fight a planet? How do you shoot its silence? One crew member, a young scout, collapsed while reviewing the old Earth structures. When she woke, her voice was calm. "Hollow," she said. They didn't leave. They waited. No one understood, but the way she said it, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a sentence. They tried to leave again, this time with brute force. Override the systems. Launch manually. Escape the atmosphere. But the engines refused to fire. The ship had locked itself down. Not broken, just compliant. To someone else. And then, for the first time, they heard a voice. Not over speakers. Not from mouth. But inside their thoughts. One word. Cold. Familiar. Human. Stay. That night, half the crew vanished. Not killed. Not confirmed. Just gone. Their quarters were undisturbed. No alarms were triggered. No escape pods used. Only one thing was left behind. A message etched into the hallway wall. In a language none of the crew had ever seen. But somehow, all of them understood it. This is not your ground. They didn't know the name of the world. They had searched the Empire's databases, checked every archive, even the forbidden ones. But the system had no label, just empty coordinates. A ghost entry. The blue planet had slipped through the cracks of galactic memory. Too small, too far, and yet, here it was. Silent, watching, waiting, until now. Kelvier stood in the memory chamber, surrounded by still frames pulled from the surface. Towers of steel, now covered in moss. Bridges, cracked in half. Machines, half buried in sand. Monuments, broken but untouched. Each one told a story, but the story was unfinished. Not because it was forgotten, but because it had stopped. Suddenly, cleanly. The other captains had theories. Some blamed climate collapse. Others suggested internal war. But nothing added up. No signs of orbital damage. No blast craters. No decay patterns consistent with global extinction. It was as if the humans had simply walked away. The scouts sent underground found something worse. A vault, sealed, still powered. They opened it with hesitation. Inside were libraries of machines, rows and rows of black boxes, humming with slow, careful life. No active AI, no weapons, just memory. The machines were archives, storage devices designed to last 1,000 years or more. And they had one purpose: to remember, not to explain, not to teach, just to preserve. And what they preserved was not government files or military orders. It was voices, people, everyday humans, talking, laughing, crying, dreaming, memories, tens of thousands of them. The predators listened in silence. And for the first time, they heard Earth breathe, not through machines, not through threats, but through the hum of ordinary life. The sound of a child learning to ride a bike. The song of an old man whistling in the rain. The hush of two people holding hands for the last time. And through it all, a feeling, a deep, heavy stillness. Like the planet itself had chosen to keep these voices safe. Because someone someday would return. And then, deep inside the vault, they found something else. A room, sealed. Inside it, a chair. And in that chair, a body. Perfectly preserved. Human. Eyes closed. Hands resting. Not in pain. Not in fear. Just waiting. Next to him was a screen. Old, flickering but still alive. It played a message. Not in sound, but in thought. A translation fed directly into their minds. And a voice spoke. Calm. Steady. Human. If you're hearing this, it said, then you've found what we left behind. We're not here anymore. Not in the way you think. But we were real. We lived. We struggled. We built. We broke. We dreamed. And when the time came, we chose to leave. The crew didn't understand. Not fully. Why would a species just vanish? Where would they go? But the voice kept speaking. Not to explain, but to warn. You are not the first to come here. And you will not be the last. But understand this. This planet is not empty. It is not dead. It remembers. Images filled their minds. Not visuals, feelings. The moment fire was discovered, the rise of cities, the fall of towers, the ache of leaving Earth behind, and the promise that one day someone would return to claim it. The predators backed away. Something in their instincts told them this wasn't just a message. It was a presence, alive in the walls, the dirt, the air, not a ghost, not a machine, but something else, something human that refused to die. The body in the chair never moved, but its shadow reached the floor at the wrong angle, longer than it should have been, sharper, almost watching them. They sealed the vault again, not out of protocol, but out of fear. They understood now. This wasn't a planet that had lost its people. This was a planet that had been prepared, not for return, but for invasion. The predators returned to their ship, shaken. None of them spoke, because there was nothing to say. They had come for prey, and found a graveyard. But the graves were not empty. They were listening. They tried to leave. Every alarm on the ship had been reset. Every error cleared. Engines primed. Courses plotted. They were ready. And yet, when they issued the launch command, nothing happened. No explosion. No malfunction. No denial. Just silence. As if the ship itself had changed its mind. Kelvier issued a full diagnostic. No faults found. No sabotage. No interference. Everything worked on paper. But something was in the systems. Not code. Not corruption. A kind of presence. Invisible. Patient. Calm. Like a hand resting just behind the controls. Not holding them. Just reminding the crew who was in charge. Panic spread quickly after that. The crew was elite, trained against fear. But this wasn't fear of death. This was fear of the unknown. Something ancient. Something intelligent. And something that didn't care whether they lived or died. Because it already knew the outcome. They sealed off the surface team. Quarantined them. But it didn't matter. One by one, they stopped speaking. Not out of shock, but out of choice. They simply stood in their quarters. Eyes closed. whispering to no one. One technician broke protocol and accessed the black box recorder from the landing team. Audio only. No visuals survived. But what it captured shook them. Not screams. Not gunfire. Just breathing. And then a voice. Human. But not the message from the vault. This one was alive. It said, "You shouldn't have come here." And then nothing. Just static. That recording was deleted. But the crew remembered. Because the voice didn't sound angry. It sounded disappointed. By the third day, the ship's gravity began to fail. Not all at once. Just enough to disorient. Enough to make the crew question whether they were rising or falling. Hallways lengthened. Doors opened onto the wrong rooms. Voices echoed when no one had spoken. Then came the reflections. Crew reported seeing people in the mirrors who weren't there. Not just strangers, themselves, but different, older, wounded. Some even saw scars on their reflected bodies that weren't on their real ones. One soldier smashed every reflective surface in his chamber. Said he saw himself dying again and again, every time he blinked. And in every reflection, he was smiling. The scientists tried to explain it. Hallucinations, sleep deprivation, environmental influence. But the data didn't agree. Brain scans showed no abnormalities. The ship's air and water were clean. And yet, the fear spread. It grew, like it was feeding on them. Kelvier called a final emergency council. 3 leaders, 7 officers, all agreed they had to get off the planet now, even if it meant abandoning the ship, even if it meant a signal flare and a year-long wait for rescue. But when they entered the launch bay, the escape pods were gone. Not destroyed, not disabled, gone, like they had never existed. The walls were still there. The lights still hummed, but the docking clamps sat empty, cold, silent, and in the center of the floor, a mark burned into the metal, a symbol none of them had seen before. But every one of them understood it. A warning, a message. This is the line you should not have crossed. Some broke at that moment, dropped to their knees. Others screamed. But Kelvier, he stood still, because he finally knew this was not a punishment. It was a test, and they had failed. He walked alone to the observation deck, looked down at the planet, blue, endless, beautiful, and understood what it was. Not just Earth, but a guardian, built not to protect humans, but to protect others from what humans had once become. A world that remembers. A world that waits. Not with teeth and claws, but with mirrors, with silence, with stories and shadows. There were no more plans, no more escape attempts, no more orders shouted across the bridge. The crew had gone quiet, not because they were calm, because they were listening. It began as a flicker on the main screen, a soft light, then a voice. Human, not speaking in words they knew, but still they understood. No translation software, no audio system. The message came from the ship itself, carried on power currents, echoed in their minds. One sentence, over and over, accessing legacy file. And then, it began. A face appeared, weathered, calm, human, eyes that had seen too much. Not angry, not frightened, just tired. He didn't introduce himself, didn't give his name. He didn't need to, because every predator watching felt who he was. He spoke like a teacher, not to a class, but to a child who had wandered into something far too dangerous. We knew this would happen, he said. Eventually, someone would come. Curious, confident, armed. But Earth isn't here for you. It never was. The image shifted. Scenes of Earth's past filled the room. But they weren't history lessons. They were memories, burned into the vaults, etched into the soil. Millions of them. Children running through fields of green. Cities glowing under distant stars. Wars that burned the sky. Hands held in final moments. Eyes closing for the last time, knowing it was all ending. And then, silence. Not defeat. Not destruction. But a choice. We didn't go extinct, the man continued. We stepped away. Not because we lost, but because we became something we couldn't trust anymore. You call yourselves predators. Good. So did we. But we didn't hunt for food or survival. We hunted ideas. We devoured meaning. We broke things not because they threatened us, but because they existed. And when we saw what we had become, we left. The crew didn't move, didn't blink, because they understood. This wasn't just a broadcast. This was a confession, a warning, a legacy. We encoded memory into the bones of this world, he said, so you could feel what we felt, see what we saw, and know why we're gone. A map bloomed into view, one none of their star charts had ever shown. Not directions, but absences. Dozens of systems. Dark, empty, erased. Once colonized, now silent. Not from war, not from disease, from choice. Human colonies, one by one, turned themselves off, vanished, not out of fear, but responsibility. We weren't meant to rule the stars, the man said. We were meant to understand them. But we got too good at changing things, too fast at turning beauty into ash. So we stopped. One final image appeared behind him. Earth, not broken, but asleep. A world set down gently. A place left behind like a letter you're afraid to send. If you're seeing this, he said, you've stepped too far. You've touched something that remembers. And memory never forgets. Then the screen went black. No explosion, no threat, just darkness, and a stillness that pressed down harder than gravity. Kelvier lowered his head. He had fought many things in his life, but never a story, never a memory. And that's what broke him. Because you can resist a weapon. You can fight a soldier. But how do you fight a species that chose to walk away? Because it was too powerful to stay? Earth wasn't a battlefield. It was a monument. Not to victory, but to warning. And the ones who built it, they may be gone, but they are not forgotten. Because Earth remembers. And now so did they. They didn't escape the way they planned. There were no launch sequences. No triumphant return to orbit. Just one small transport shuttle, ancient, half buried beneath the dust near the vaults. It wasn't part of their fleet. It wasn't built by them. But when they stepped inside, it powered on. Kelvier and 4 others climbed aboard. No one spoke, not because of silence, but because words had lost their meaning. What would be said after what they had seen? How do you explain fear when the thing that caused it never raised a hand? The shuttle lifted off without command. No flight controls, no pilot's chair. It just rose, as if Earth itself had allowed it, as if the planet had made a decision. Not to punish, not to forgive, but to release. The predators watched through the hull as the blue world shrank behind them. Still beautiful, still quiet, still waiting. And none of them dared to wonder what might happen if they ever came back. When the shuttle reached deep orbit, their main ship came back online. Lights flickered, systems rebooted, but the ship felt different. Not damaged, not haunted, just emptier. They sent out the emergency beacon, a long-range distress call. No details, just coordinates. And then they waited. It took 2 cycles for a patrol vessel to arrive. When it did, the rescue team found 5 hardened predators slumped in their seats. Alive, uninjured, but changed. They refused to speak of what happened. Wouldn't give details. Wouldn't name the planet. Only one message was submitted to the Central Core. 6 words. Do not go to the blue world. The Core dismissed it. At first, too vague. No proof. But the message kept echoing. Passed from outpost to outpost. Fleet to fleet. And then, the disappearances began. Scouting ships sent near the system failed to return. Long-range scans of the region returned static. Drones lost navigation. Even unmanned probes vanished without impact. Just gone. The blue world didn't shoot them down. Didn't intercept. Didn't do anything. It simply did not allow them to come close. And still, no one dared to say its name. Not because they feared it, but because they remembered it. In their bones, in their dreams. They remembered the voice in the dark, the calm warning, the face that never blinked. Kelvier was removed from command, not for failure, but for silence. He never filed a report, never told anyone what he saw. But sometimes, in the middle of long, starless nights, he would sit alone in a sealed room and whisper something to himself, a word the others couldn't understand. A name, maybe, or a place. He would say it softly, not with fear, but with respect, like someone lighting a candle at a grave. And then he would smile, because Kelvier hadn't just escaped. He had witnessed something most would never understand, something no empire could ever contain. He knew Earth was still there, still watching, still listening, not with satellites, but with memory. And sometimes, that is stronger than any weapon. The galaxy did what it always does. It moved on. Fleets reorganized. Territories shifted. Borders grew and shrank like tides. Empires rose, made alliances, broke them, and rose again. The blue world was logged, categorized, filed away in the deep archives. Flagged as unstable, untouchable, not dangerous, no, just remembered. The story spread slowly, not through official channels, but in quiet spaces, among the old captains, the long haulers, the ones who had seen too much to scoff at shadows. They didn't call it Earth. They didn't give it a name. They simply said, "There's a place you do not go." And when the young ones asked why, the old ones would look away and say, "Because it remembers." And if you pressed further, they would go quiet, not from fear, but from respect, because Earth had left behind more than ruins, more than warnings. It had left behind a legacy, a signal not built from light or sound, but from something older, from silence, from waiting, and from knowing. It was not a weapon, not a trap. It was something worse. It was a mirror, a perfect reflection of what a species could become if it ever forgot what it was. The predators, for all their strength, all their technology, had never known shame. Until then, until Earth, until they stood in the presence of a species that had chosen, willingly, to walk away from power, because they had seen what it did, and what it would do. That's what haunted them. Not what humans had done, but what they had chosen not to do. The galaxy had always believed strength meant dominance, that the apex predator was the one who claimed the highest ground. But the blue world had proven something else, something quieter, something harder to name, that the strongest ones are the ones who remember what it cost to win. Centuries passed, but the memory didn't fade, because stories like that never do. They root themselves deep, not in history, but in instinct. And somewhere, out beyond the edge of the known systems, there's a world that turns in silence. It doesn't broadcast. It doesn't scream. It just waits. Not for an army. Not for war. Just for someone to listen. And if they do, if they really listen, they'll hear it. A heartbeat. Steady. Ancient. Still echoing through soil and stars. And it will say, softly, "We were here. We're not gone. And we have not forgotten." The galaxy's greatest predators thought they had no match. But they were wrong. Because Earth never needed to fight them. It only needed to show them who they truly were, and who they could have been.